Alderman Bratt,
Here.
Alderman Gebhardt,
Here.
and Mayor Nurbin.
Here. First up, we have approval of the meeting minutes from last month, February 11th. Is there a motion? Or
Motion to approve.
motion?
Second.
Motion a second. Any comments, questions, corrections, etc.? Hearing and seeing none, all is in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. On to our two discussion items. The first, Milwaukee River and Trinity Creek floodplain modeling review. I think Assistant Director Zader will take over and give us a little intro.
Sure, I'm sure as you all recall, we adopted our FEMA floodplain maps in July 31st of 2024. During this adoption process, staff identified, I guess I'll call it an anomaly with one of the variables in the model. So we were concerned about the accuracy of the model. We were under a time crunch to adopt the model in order to remain in the program. So we adopted the maps, and then we decided in October to hire M² Engineering to do an analysis of the modeling that was used. And have Kendra from M² here. She'll give a presentation on what they found in addition to the concern over the flow rate. They found a couple other items that we can talk about. So I'll turn it over to her, and then I'll come back with some follow-up. So.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. As Jack said, my name is Kendra Gabbert with M² Engineering, and we've done a review of the Milwaukee River floodplain analysis, so thank you for letting us go over that review with you today. A little bit of background. As Jack just mentioned, you guys, FEMA updated the floodplain maps in July of 2024. You guys adopted those maps at the time, understanding you wanted to do a more in-depth review of what was going on with the maps. One of those things that we understand the city had a concern with was that although the hydraulic modeling of the floodplains, Milwaukee River in particular, was updated, the hydrologic modeling or the flows for the Milwaukee River were not updated as part of this recent mapping update that FEMA performed. We also understand that there were some concerns with the increase in the base flood elevations and the widening of the floodplain, specifically between Mequon Road and Highland Road, and where those increases were coming from. So these maps here, this is just kind of showing some snapshots of the old floodplain maps, the previous FEMA floodplain maps compared to the newer floodplain maps. On the left here, you can see in the blue, it might be a little bit hard to see it back in the room, but there's hatching in the middle here. That is showing the floodway, the 100-year floodway, and then the blue outside of that is the 100-year floodplain. And then here on the right, these are the newly adopted FEMA maps. The red hatching is that floodway, the 100-year floodway, and the blue is the same, the 100-year floodplain. Again, it might be a little bit hard to see, but highlighting an area here where the floodway was increased quite a bit from what we had in the previous maps. Oops, sorry about that. So this did not used to be floodway, but now in the newer maps, that is an area of floodway. Here's another area where we've got Mequon Road here at the bottom, and we've got another area where the floodway has increased a little bit compared to what the previous maps showed. The floodway was a little bit narrower. And again, it's a little bit hard to see, but here at the curve of the river, the floodway and floodplain got wider, impacting a little bit more area of land in that area. And then finally, one of the other areas that we looked at was the Trinity Creek area where it joins into Milwaukee River. In the previous maps, the Trinity Creek did not have a floodway identified or delineated. Now the new maps do show a floodway delineated, which means there are properties in the floodway that didn't used to be in delineated floodway. So as Jack mentioned, M² was brought on to kind of do a more in-depth review of the hydraulic modeling and to also look into the flows from Milwaukee River. Specifically the 1% annual chance flood flows, which is a long way to say the 100-year flows. That's the 100-year floodplain, how the 100-year floodplain gets delineated for the rivers. So we looked into those flows. We also looked into the BFE increases on the Milwaukee River between Highland Road and Mequon Road. And then we also looked at the floodway expansion on Milwaukee River and at Trinity Creek. So the first thing we looked at when we did this more in-depth review was the hydrologic analysis, which again, that's just the flows used for the modeling. The original flows were developed using regression equations in 1991 with the data available up until that date. And as I mentioned before, the mapping updates that happened last year did not include an update to those flows. So it was still using that information from the 1991 regression equations. We have access to at least 34 more years of data now that we can look into, specifically from a USGS gauging station at Pioneer Road. So what we ended up doing was using StreamStats, which is a program that USGS has to analyze flows for river systems like the Milwaukee River. We used that to develop flows for different areas around the Milwaukee River, and then we compared those flows to the gauging station at Pioneer Road to kind of correlate those flows and make sure that they were making sense with that gauging station information that we have over 30 years of data for. As you can see by this table, we've got significant decreases in the flows for the Milwaukee River. These are 3 cross-section locations along the river, one upstream of Falls Road in Grafton, one at the confluence of Cedar Creek, and then one upstream of County Line Road. And as you can see by these decreases, like this is a significant amount of decrease in flow that is really showing a significant amount of decrease in the BFEs that were that the Milwaukee River shows along in the city of Mequon. We also did an in-depth hydraulic review. The Milwaukee River was modeled using HEC-RAS, which is a common river hydraulic modeling system or software. And when we did this review, we were checking input parameters, we were checking assumptions made to kind of make sure that these were things that we agreed with, that we think, to see if there were other things that we might want to refine about the model. We did come up with several areas that we thought would be beneficial to getting accurate BFEs to refine in the model. One of those is, of course, what I just mentioned, updating the flows for the model. That's a significant one. Another one is to refine ineffective flow areas, which I'll go over that in more detail in just a minute. Same with refining the Manning's N values in the model. Again, I'll go over that in more detail in just a minute. And also to update the floodway limit analysis used in the model. FEMA has a procedure that they recommend you follow when doing a floodway delineation, and we found that that procedure wasn't necessarily followed for this model. What was done isn't inaccurate or incorrect per se, but it's just something that isn't as commonly used, and we feel like given the potential impacts to property owners, it would be beneficial to use the procedure that FEMA recommends for the floodway analysis. So ineffective flow areas are just areas that are used to adjust the conveyance in a floodplain. This schematic here is just showing a plan view of, if you can imagine this is a road with like a structure, a bridge or a culvert. We've got flow coming from the top of the page through the structure to the bottom of the page. Ineffective flow area is used to show that areas behind the roadway embankment may not be conveying flow as part of the floodplain. So those are important around things like bridges, around the Thiensville Dam. The ineffective flow areas are also used. When we did a in-depth review of the model, we found certain areas that we didn't agree with how the ineffective flow areas were modeled, so we thought it would be beneficial and result in more accurate BFEs to refine those ineffective flow areas. This is one example. This is showing a cross-section of the Pioneer Road Bridge over the Milwaukee River. The green over here is showing hatching of the ineffective flow area, and the gray is the roadway embankment. In this case, the roadway embankment would make sense to be ineffective and not contributing to the conveyance of flow, but any flow over the roadway would make sense to contribute to that conveyance. So it would make more sense to not have this area be ineffective, but instead showing the road being overtopped. Making this not ineffective flow would potentially reduce the BFEs or the base flood elevations in this location. So these are the kinds of things we were seeing in the model. Another thing that we found that we felt should be adjusted in the model were the Manning's N values. Manning's N values are coefficients that measure the roughness of the channel and the overbank area. This is tied to like the vegetation or obstructions in the channel. The higher the N value, the more obstruction or vegetation you might have in the channel, and the slower the water flows, which means that the water depth goes up. So we found what we felt were pretty high end values in a lot of overbank areas that were representing more vegetation than is actually out there in the channel, or in the overbank of the floodplain. So we recommended adjusting those end values based on our site visits we had to the area, and generally this resulted in decreasing the base flood elevations throughout the city of Mequon. And then finally, as I mentioned, the floodway limits was another area that we felt would be a good idea to adjust how the floodways were delineated in the project area for both Milwaukee River and the Trinity Creek. Again, the way that the floodways are currently delineated is not incorrect. It's just that FEMA has a way that is a recommended procedure for delineating the floodway, and we feel like it would be beneficial to follow that procedure so that it's more defendable through FEMA's process. So based on those recommendations, we've updated the modeling, and we have some results here to show base flood elevation reductions. These are just the water surface elevations. We've got the different stretches of Milwaukee River here, from Pioneer Road to Highland Road to Thiensville Dam, the dam to the Mequon Road, and then Mequon Road to County Line Road. Here we have the range of flood elevations for each of those reaches. Here we have, these are the FEMA mapped flood elevations, and then here we have the flood elevations based on the recommendations that we changed in the model, and then here we have the average base flood elevation reduction. You can see for most of these reaches we're right around that 3 foot mark of 3 feet reduction in base flood elevation. The majority of this base flood elevation reduction is due to the flow reduction that we talked about in the I talked about in the beginning of this. Things like changing the ineffective flow area and changing the Manning's N value did have an impact on this, but that was more in the range of maybe 6 inches, whereas the rest of this reduction is mostly due to the flow reduction. And then you can also see here the stretch from Mequon Road to County Line Road has a slightly less average BFE reduction. That's because we're proposing to tie in at County Line Road, so our average reduction is going from about 3 feet down to 0 feet. Let me go back to this for a second. We're proposing to tie into County Line Road just because we're proposing to kind of keep this clean right now to the constraints of City of Mequon, but it could be something we discuss of seeing if we want to chase these changes any further downstream, if that makes sense or not. And then the next several slides, I'm just gonna scroll through quickly. We don't need to dig into these in too much detail, but these just show the river station cross sections. There's several cross sections of the Milwaukee River through the city of Mequon, and then these columns here are the floodplain widths of the Milwaukee River at these cross sections. So over here we have the FEMA TW stands for top width of the floodplain width, and then the M2 top width is the top width based on those reductions that the recommendations we talked about. And then our final column here is the reduction in the top width. So this is mostly to show you that there are some areas that this is producing quite a bit of reduction in the top width of the floodplain width. There's some areas where it's not as much, 5 feet, 20 feet. But if you wanted to look at this table in more detail, that's what these tables show, is that reduction in top width of floodplain. Here's another view of the results. This is just showing the profile of the floodplain. Here we've got County Line Road is where the end of the model starts here. We've got Mequon Road, Thiensville Dam, Highland Road, and then Pioneer Road. And so you can see this is kind of the area within City of Mequon where we've got the reduction of about 3 feet in the base flood elevations. This is going to be a little bit hard for everyone to see. I apologize for that. But this is a plan view of the Milwaukee River, a schematic of the Milwaukee River. Again, we've got County Line Road down here and Pioneer Road up here. And you can't really see it very easily on here, but there's areas shown in red around like the bend of the river. There's a little area sliver here of red. That's showing the floodway reduction, again, from the FEMA mapped flows to the proposed changes we recommended and modeled. This is a profile of Trinity Creek. We also reviewed Trinity Creek to determine if we had any significant changes to the way that that was modeled. We did not find nearly as many things that we would recommend changing or refining in the Trinity Creek model, either for the hydrology, the flows, or for the hydraulic model. We have a little bit of a reduction right at the downstream end here where it ties into Milwaukee River, but the rest of the water surface elevations actually tie in pretty closely to what FEMA's mapped water surface elevations showed. And then same thing, this is a plan view of Trinity Creek. We've got tying into Milwaukee River would be right here on the right. You can see right here at the edge of, or area between Milwaukee River and the Central Wisconsin Railroad would be there would be some reductions in the floodway where this red is shown, but generally past that, we're not showing much reduction in the floodway for Trinity Creek. So of course, the big question for this would be the next steps. What would we do next with this information? And one of the important next steps would be pursuing a letter of map change to actually go through the FEMA process to change the FEMA maps to be more in line with what we've been showing tonight with the reduced flows, some of the refinement to the modeling, and showing those reduction in BFEs and floodplain top widths throughout the city of Mequon. This would require some additional modeling effort because through the FEMA process, there's kind of a step-by-step process that you have to follow with different models that you set up. So although we have part of the modeling done for that, there would be some additional modeling that would need to be done to get through the FEMA process. We feel that it's important for the city to understand that this process could take at least a year. FEMA has about 3-month review periods every time that information is submitted to them through a FEMA map change. And in our experience, they will end up taking that full 3-month time frame. We would expect that there would be at least one round of comments and discussion and coordination with FEMA before having to resubmit another round of comments to or another round of information to them. So we think that it would be important. There would also be then a public notice period once FEMA conditionally accepts the change to the maps, that the maps would be public notice and to accept that this change makes sense to everybody who would be affected. And then we've also talked about that the city should budget around $75,000 in engineering fees to do this additional modeling, the map change effort, and this coordination with FEMA that might be needed for the map change through FEMA's process. So with that, if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer whatever I can.
Thank you. I'll open it up to the floor I'll lead with one question. I noticed you mentioned tying the maps into the county line road. Obviously, there's some, if you look at the modeling data and what's been used, they use basically the same flow rate at the north end of Mequon as they did at the south end of Mequon. So there's obvious errors all the way down to about where Lincoln Creek ties into the Milwaukee River. If we were to find a couple other willing participants south of us, obviously we could tie that in farther to the south. I think if we can coordinate that, there's some value because it's not like the errors stopped happening at the county line. They keep on going all the way down, and then reality and the modeling line up again at where the Esterbrook Dam was. Maybe they don't even line up there anymore because I'm not sure if they've reflected the removal of the dam properly. But I guess I would be seeking to try and get other participants, and we've talked to some of the communities to the south already, and they're paying attention and they're interested. So.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'd let that hold up this effort, but maybe we'd try to get them in along the way and try and marry those up at some point in the future. But with that, I'll open it up to the floor. Alderman Stralchuk.
So, first of all, thank you and great work. And Alderperson Talako pointed out that she thought that there were errors, and we talked about errors, and this is all all a point of the city trying to do the right thing by the residents and make sure that the people that are impacted by this have the least amount of impact possible, or at least something that's accurate, right?
Yeah.
My question, and overall, I'm irritated as heck. The city's budgeting another $75,000 to fix somebody else's mistake. What is the recoup process for the funds that are being spent? So there's a noted error on there. There's some clear noted errors. Is there a way that we can say we've noted these errors and then maybe give them an opportunity to fix their own maps, and then for us to review and then resubmit if we see something else to try to avoid that, or if we can ask them if they can fund the restructuring of the maps moving forward, or there's a recovery process for those funds. It falls on our taxpayers to fix a governmental agency that made an egregious error that we're trying to rectify. So I guess my questioning is how can we recover some of those funds and continue along this process with the good work that you're
Maybe
doing?
asking the wrong person.
Yeah, well, I'm asking in general.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You can
I
ask
looked at her
me.
'cause
I've-
she spoke
I've
last and she's
attempted-
really smart,
I've
so I hope
written
she knew everything.
Every state and federal elected official that represents us, and it all gets directed back to FEMA, and they say no. They say we missed our appeal period. Of course, we're appealing a map that was generated off of data we didn't have access to, that we later found out was faulty. I don't know that we should let that be holding up any decision making now, but you can bet I'll be lobbying like hell to get our money back at the end of all this. But yeah, this isn't our fault. This goes back to shoddy work done in the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, we didn't discuss it directly here, but the major source of the flow rate error was forgetting to subtract the flow coming in from Lincoln Creek into the Milwaukee River when they extrapolated north. It's not, calling it sophomoric would be an insult. I mean, it's worse than that. It's a huge oversight. So we will be lobbying. I'll be lobbying personally, but I think we should get going and not worry about that. It's a manageable sum of money. It's not a giant sum. It's not small, but it's manageable.
I will be in Washington, D.C. if anybody wants to set up a discussion. I'm happy to take time away from my family trip to go, spearhead some of this discussion with anybody that'll listen.
Maybe a little early for spring break this year, but
I'll fly back out on my own.
I'm not afraid to travel. So, any other questions, Alderman Bach?
Maybe this is another question for you, Mayor. When you were speaking at that recent forum, the Thiensville president was also speaking, and they were talking about their issues too with the river. Is there any discussion? Are they doing a similar thing, or are we working together with them at all? Or do you have any information on what's happening there?
So I've been in conversations with them, most recently just this past weekend. They're on board and willing to participate at some level with us. But this modeling segment for FEMA basically it goes from the northern end of Mequon to the southern end. They're just trapped in the middle. So they're paying attention as well, but they're willing to be a partner in this. Any other questions? Alderwoman Talaco.
No questions. I just wanted to applaud the city's work on this coming through. I think the next step seems very logical, is that we would come up with this sum in order to continue this momentum forward. I know Jack hasn't spoken quite yet, but this affects more homes than we originally thought. We don't have an exact estimate, but this changes things also from a city perspective as far as taxes and what people can do to their homes. So while we might be putting some money forward, we're giving the property rights back to our citizens where they need to be. And the city also gets to benefit from that, from them being able to make improvements to their homes for us to gain a little bit more too. So all around, I think this is a no-brainer, and I look forward to hearing all of my fellow councilmen support this, and let's move this forward.
Is there someone on the left here? Alderman Gebhardt.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question, in terms of what your experiences have been in the past in filing appeals and what the success rate has been in those prior situations.
Well, this wouldn't necessarily be considered an appeal. It would be, FEMA has a process to just make a map change when communities find either errors or better data, better information. That's usually what happens, is better information comes forward and they just make a map change request through FEMA. So my experience is, I mean, I've had over 15 years of experience doing map changes, not quite as big as this as for a whole community, but and they've all been approved. So it's something that I think is likely to move through the process. I think there will be some back and forth to make sure that FEMA feels on board with the flow change reduction, because that is a significant reduction. But yeah, I mean, I think we have the information we need to move forward with that process and show them what they need to see to be able to approve the map change.
And then just an additional follow-up question. I'm not sure that anybody can provide this answer, but how does what's happening in Washington right now have an impact on this process, either in terms of what's going to be required or in terms of maybe the length of time that might be required to walk this through?
That's actually a good question. I think in terms of the length of time, that's a little bit of, it does shoot it in that unknown period where, as I said before, FEMA has a 3-month review period. They've been taking that full time, but that's been in previous years where they've already been considered understaffed. If they become further understaffed, then I don't know how long it might take them to be able to review through this information. I also don't know if they might end up changing any of the review requirements that they have if for this information coming in. So that is a good question. That is a good thing to kind of keep in mind, kind of why we're saying that like this could be a lengthy process to get this map change approved.
One last question. Is there a period of time that we have to ask for this request? Is there like a statute of limitations?
Nope, this is on our decision, on your guys' timetable of when you want to make that change.
Yeah, we can do it at any time. The thing that had a time limit was the appeal period, 90 days after the public information meeting where DNR said they didn't want any technical input. They only wanted typographical errors and things like that addressed. This is literally their own words, which is further adds to the irony. So we're not really contesting FEMA's maps. We're contesting DNR's maps that were submitted to FEMA on behalf of the state. So I'm not sure that FEMA cares. They probably just want to get it right.
No, the only timeline issue would be that the people that are paying flood insurance eventually, you know, if we get the maps changed, a lot of people will no longer have to pay that money. So
And yeah, given the error in the flow rate since 1991, it's been going on a long time.
yeah.
Alderman Bach.
Mayor, so in order to keep this process moving, assuming the committee is supportive, what's the next steps in finding the unbudgeted $75,000? How do we work on that?
I think I see Administrator Jones reaching for his microphone.
Alderman Bach, so glad you asked. If there is a willingness on the part of the committee here this evening to move forward, I would suggest politely that direction be given to staff here this evening to pursue a contract with M Squared, the firm that did the initial modeling review that we reviewed here tonight, to pursue a letter of map amendment, if I have that term correct, and for staff to work on identifying appropriate funding sources, pay-as-you-go funding sources, that don't otherwise blow a hole in our 2025 operating budget. We're about 20% into the fiscal year right now. I certainly don't, as the city's budget officer, want to assume a $75,000 cost that we hopefully have to save and make up for as we get into the latter parts of the fiscal year. So I would like the opportunity to work with our finance director to identify some other alternative sources of funds that may be appropriate for paying for such a contract. Interestingly, we have our auditors here this week. They are working to put together the preliminary audit for fiscal year 2024. Assuming we have some favorable results from last year, that may have an impact on our fund balance, which would be one potential source of funds to underwrite this unbudgeted expense. So if there is, to bring it to a close here, an interest in moving forward, we would work with M Squared to get a hard number. We would reach out to our partners in Thiensville to determine an appropriate cost-sharing amount. I think I heard 12% this morning of
Yeah,
the
12%
cost.
of the river runs along Thiensville, but only half of it is on their bank, the other half is on our bank.
And then schedules permitting and understanding the urgency here at hand, we would look to bring back a contract award as soon as the April 8th Common Council meeting here in this room. If, schedules align and we're able to get everything together. We also have another meeting the following week, April 15th, which could be a fallback if we run into some complications or we need a little more time. So hopefully that answers your question, Alderman Bach.
Alderman Strelchak.
I 100% support the movement towards having M Squared put forth some hard numbers, working with Thiensville and keeping this moving as quickly as possible. My thoughts are that residents are paying for flood insurance that maybe didn't last year, and if they have a chance to rectify it ideally within this year, so the sooner the better, maybe they can get a refund from their insurance company because they were incorrectly billed for that amount. As it goes beyond the fiscal year, the potential to get any of that back might be diminished. So again, moving forward on this sooner than later, just to have people have peace of mind and be able to plan.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, but I think FEMA's got a one-year clawback.
1 year clawback, yes.
So a very generous 1 year. So the other 39 years for people that they may have had to pay incorrectly, that's kind of water under the bridge, for lack of a better term. But at least there's the 1 year. Maybe good time for a straw poll vote. Yeah, just by show of hands, who's generally in agreement with what Will just said? Okay, good. We've got everyone on board conceptually. So I think is that enough direction for staff to move forward towards next month?
That's plenty of direction. Thank you, Mayor and members of the committee. Jack, I was speaking freely there just a moment ago. Anything that you'd like to add relative to what I described?
No, we'll just have to verify what M Squared their schedule. I think it sounds like it's doable, but we'll just have to make sure that they have the ability to do the work when the time allowed. So, but other than that, yeah, correct. And we'll reach out to other communities downstream as well to see if they want to participate as well. We don't
now
want to
that
hold
we've
it up.
signaled an intent to move forward, I think we should contact those just to our south. There's been some interested parties, and surely they'll be interested in the preliminary report, maybe as much as we are once they see the numbers. So we'll see what we can shake loose there, but I think we should get going. And then if others want to join the fight, maybe there's definitely be some synergy of the work. Maybe the whole effort doesn't cost that much more. We can all cost share a little bit more in the fight together. But maybe to the north too. I'm not sure if our neighbors to the north are interested. They may be. Rob, Alderman Strelchak.
Yeah,
again.
from a cost share perspective from Thiensville, let's ask M Squared what it would cost if they just did the study for their portion alone and maybe just not only look at a percentage and find a number somewhere in between.
I'm not sure you could do it alone because they're a donut in the middle of Mequon, but we'll consider it. We'll find a method that's equitable and defendable. Any other comments or questions while we have the consultant here? Thank you. Good work. Yeah. I'm excited to move on to the next phase, as many are, I'm sure. I think with that, we have enough to move on to our next item, unless there's any parting words. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next topic before us is the 2025 Community Survey.
Yes, please.
Mayor, while they're setting up,
Sure.
I want to thank Carrie and for all of her work on this. It was invaluable. I'm sorry that it's not done yet. You have a lot more to go. So, but also Justin for his direction on that. Public Welfare has been working on this for a while, and I hope that the Common Council members have been either following along with minutes or through our agendas and have been looking at the work we've been doing. We sent out surveys or questionnaires to the different other committees, boards, and the staff to make sure to get their input and to make sure that they got their questions answered. As a matter of fact, we did one meeting we held totally for the fact of making sure that when we went over the survey that a lot of those questions were, their questions were answered for them. We put a lot of effort into the fact of making sure that the questions were not pushed in one direction or leaned in one direction for it. We tried to make sure that the clarity of the questions and that they were easy to read. Tonight is our Committee of the Whole's opportunity to get input on this and to do any changes that would need to be done. Feel free to whatever you think of it. And at that, I'll turn it over to Carrie and Justin. They're going to give a little presentation on it.
Well, thanks everyone. So I'll kick off a little bit of history. This is now going to be the 5th survey completed by the city on behalf of. Sorry,
Short pause for technical difficulties here.
Perfect. So the last community survey was completed in 2019, and a lot of that work was done back then by Public Welfare over the course of several meetings to create the survey that went out and wrapped up in 2020. And as part of this process, Public Welfare Committee began working on a new survey here in February. A contract was awarded to ETC to assist the city with the survey in September of last year. And since then, we've been working through a number of steps that has resulted in the survey that's included in tonight's packet. And Public Welfare will continue to work on the survey post tonight. And if any aldermen wish to attend, there'll be a special meeting on the 20th of this month. Feel free to join Welfare as we button up the survey and go into next steps. So without further ado, Carrie's going to touch on the current survey format a bit more.
So the 2025 survey is made up of 22 questions, and just to give you some framework from the 2019 survey, it had 30 questions. There's 5 sections. Section 1 has the community attributes, so it asks residents to rate the city, give their perceptions and how they want to see the future size. Section 2, satisfaction with various city services that we offer. Then Section 3 goes into development. We ask about residential, industrial, as well as the Port Washington corridor and what types of businesses they would like to see in that area. So Section 4, we move on to parks and open space. So we do talk about the pool, what amenities they would like to see if we were to build a new one. We talk about the roadside paths as well as park initiatives, both from the plans that just took place. And then section 5 is the demographics. That in the previous survey, it was in section 1, but the consultant said that people don't necessarily want to open up a survey giving detailed information about themselves, so we moved that to the end. And we'll go through these again in a few slides so that you can give your feedback on each section. So moving forward, this is the timeline we're looking at. As Justin just mentioned, there is going to be that special public works meeting on March 20th. And then in mid-May is when the survey as well as postcards are going to be mailed out by ETC. Let me back up. So the first week of April is once we get your feedback is when the final survey instrument from us is due to the consultant for them to put the full survey together to mail out. So then the survey is going to close probably around the beginning of July. That exact timeline of the due date will still be determined at the next public welfare meeting. And then August is when we'll get that final report from ETC of all the results. So you will see ETC back at Committee of the Whole on September 9th, and they will give a presentation of everything we have gathered from the survey. So now we'll go through each section, and thank you to those aldermen that gave us feedback ahead of time. As we get to those sections, I'll point out maybe when a few of you may want to speak. So let's start with the cover letter. I think Alderman Gebhardt, you had a suggestion of how to rephrase something in the cover letter. If you would like to start us out.
Sure, great, thank you. And appreciate everybody's effort, as I said in my email. I know there's a lot of time and energy that went into thinking this through and being thoughtful with the outcome and getting us to where we are here today. So really, I was just trying to provide some constructive feedback and know that there's a lot of other discussions and smart minds that have been part of this process. So with that said, the area that I focused on in the letter was really the how. How is this going to be used? I think that's a really important piece. I think we've walked into a situation where we've had a bit of a conflicting message where the stakeholders in the community have used prior reports from consultants and or surveys to think that that is going to be our North Star, our guiding light. And I just thought that there might be an opportunity to go ahead and soften that a little bit and just say it's one of many data points or one of many variables that we use in making our decision. Everybody wants the world, but at the end of the day, we've got to factor in costs and a lot of other variables that on the surface aren't generally recognized or fully understood. And so I just didn't want there to be the perception that this somehow was going to be the only tool or the top data point for us as we're making some of our decisions here moving forward. So that's my comment in regards to that.
Thank you.
So if there's general agreement with the committee, we can work on making that amendment to the cover letter.
Yeah, I don't think that's an issue, including that inside of there. I think it's a good point to put that in there for it.
So then we can move on to section 1, which was community attributes. And Alderman Gebhardt, I think you may have had something to say about question number 3.
I did, and let me maybe make a general statement, and this kind of goes for the flow of the survey as a whole. We're asking the opinion of the residents, which we certainly value. The other side of the equation, and you've heard me mention this before, is at what cost, right? You want this, but at what cost, right? And so as we come back specifically to item 3, I struggled a little bit with that one. I felt like it was a leading question, meaning that everybody, wants to maintain a rural character, density, and future development, right? Versus just asking what their opinion is versus the size of the community, if you will. But again, I'm very much in support of the, the way it's set up, but again, the other half to that, at what cost, right? And so, one of the things that I want to be careful of is everybody likes status quo. The reality from where we sit in terms of, managing costs and inflation and everything else, status quo isn't achievable without some additional sacrifices along the way, okay? So I thought maybe there could be a way to be more thoughtful with that at, as that was phrased.
Can you
Thank you.
Can Alderman Gephardt just clarify, how do you, where in this is about population size, so what does it have to do with cost? I'm just not drawing the connection. Question 3, so we want to maintain rural character and density, so what's the ultimate projected population of Mequon down the road?
Help understand it better. If you just kept everything static and inflation keeps on marching on, you will almost certainly have to raise taxes at some point. That's at the cost of what? Now, I don't even know if we could quantify it because we can't predict the future, but what is certain is that inflation will keep on happening, and if nothing changes ever, you're a penny and a half away from hitting our levy cap limit. Something will have to change. You either have to cut cost or raise revenue on an ongoing basis. I think that's the nature of Alderman Gebhardt's question. There's status quo that's one of the reasons we'll get to that in a bit when we get to the other section. That's one of the reasons we want to look at expanding industrial is, frankly, you need to add tax base somehow to generate revenue to feed the machine. We can look, and we have looked hard at cutting and trimming, but the tip of that pencil is so sharp now, you're really at the point where you're faced with cutting essential things or having to raise revenue some other way at some point in the future. And I think we'll have a whole workshop on that coming up in May when we discuss long-term municipal finance and the operating budget. But I think that's the nature of Alderman Gebhardt's comment.
Well said, Mayor, and I agree. As I look at it in terms of levers for additional revenue to offset some of the increased cost, future development and adding additional residents to this community are essential for us to be able to, again, cover the cost.
At the same time, you have to be careful. Yeah. We see it to our north in Grafton, right? There's too much too quickly, perhaps, and that puts other strains and pressures on the city. So even if you have to grow, you have to do it smartly. It's a part of that's, we'll get to it. Yeah, I'll see you over there. Part of it's having to deal with it. There's so many variables. This could be like a whole page-long question, but you can't do that in this format. I'm not sure we could calculate the cost of anything accurately that far out anyway, but the point is well taken.
Just to answer Alderman Gebhardt's question number 3, there was, it's been in most of the surveys also, just to see how the thought process of the residents have changed a little bit. If that has changed from beforehand, they had specific questions to this, and so we're kind of doing it as a comparison for the two inside of it to see how the perception of the residents have changed to city size and stuff like that for it.
Alderwoman Talaco.
To question 3, sorry. You can go on. I interpret that as it would be a question to tell me from the residents how fast, land is going to get developed. Change is always inevitably going to happen, but that's going to help us decide, are we going to hold our standards of the 1 acre lot? Or are we going to say, hey, look, they do want this high density, they do want a higher population in these areas. So I think it can be a question that can show us more information than saying we hit 30,000, we're going to cap it. I don't think that was the intent of this question. I think it can be used for other interpretation. And as far as it being leading the rural character and density, it's kind of historically what Mequon's always been called, right? Ever since I was a little girl, it was always Mequon was this rural little city. Does that need to be in the question? Maybe not. What's your opinion on the population size? And that could give us an idea of how fast people are able to adjust with growth.
Alderman Strelchak.
I'm just, so, Alderman Gebhardt, so you want kind of the precursor language taken out of that? I'm just trying to understand what we're trying to accomplish.
That would be one recommendation. Again, it's just constructive feedback. I'm not here trying to backseat
No.
drive in any way. I'm just throwing some feedback out there. Again, a lot of smart minds that have gotten to this point. If the shoe fits, great, wear it, make the adjustments. If not, and there's a broader purpose to it, I'm great with that.
So are we just looking to say, in your opinion, what is the ideal size of Mequon? The future state ideal size? Is that just what we're trying to ask? As a data point? I'm just trying to get we do the survey to understand what resident perception is and resident desire is for the community, so that we have, again, as Alderman Gebhardt shared, the data point in which we can put it in our decision tree, right? So I'm just trying to understand which data points we can put into this question to,
That was the intent of the committee,
yep.
to see what is the ultimate size so we can make decisions to control the rate of growth. And I think most of us would agree on the committee that Alderman Gephardt's suggestion is a good one, and we can simplify the question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm comfortable with it either way. I was just trying to understand where we're going with it. If we were trying to understand a different data point.
Alderman Meyer.
You know, it's coming to, pertaining to cost and that on the different items and that, I think we struggled at public welfare we were thinking about that too, and we should include all these different things inside about cost and different options and stuff, and then realize we have such a limited space to do that, and sometimes explaining some of those things are very difficult to do, to make it clear, concise, and do it in a really short sentence or two, you know. So we opted to try to do the best we could in clarifying that question, or questions that pertain to it, and then got out from there. But I agree with you, in the perfect world, you could have what the costs are, and because everybody's going to say, like we had in other questions in past surveys, was the fact that, yeah, I'm for that, yeah, I'm for this, yeah, I'm for this. Are you for it if your taxes went up? And he went, no. You know, so, you know, we've had that in the past with it, and almost, I mean, every survey we had that inside of there, and they said the same exact thing. So kind of assuming that outcome on some of these questions when it comes to doing some of the projects that we may or may not do.
Yeah, the full depth of that question could probably occupy a 2-hour meeting with this body, who knows the ins and outs of it better than the average citizen. It's a really difficult one, but I guess we're taking an action to simplify the question a little bit. We don't have to do it right here on the floor, but the staff will take a note. Should we move on to the next one? I predict lots of 1s and 4s for that one, because you're either going to say keep it as it is or I don't know. But we'll see what comes back.
Okay, so we will move on to section 2, the satisfaction with city services. Does anybody have any feedback of maybe some services that we did not include?
You have like a 4C additional comments, and then under 5, it would maybe have a spot for additional comments there too, because I guess if someone's like very dissatisfied or dissatisfied, they're probably going to tell us why, and it'd be nice to gauge why. And then usually if you do something really well, they're going to tell you why too. So that would also be great, even just to share with the city staff that does a terrific job.
Looks like there's just a sliver of white space at the end of that page where you could slip that same question in, yeah.
Noted.
Okay, yes, thank you. We will note that. So if there's no other comments there, we can move on to section 3, which talks about development. And we did get a pre-comment from Alderman Bratt on maybe including a map of the Port Washington corridor. It's described but not shown like in those other 2 maps that were in that section. So that we did talk about that at the Public Welfare Committee, and we thought there might be 2 options to that: either include a 3rd map or make one map that is larger that shows A, B, and C. So I don't know what your thoughts are, anyone's thoughts are on that, but that was discussed earlier this evening.
I guess I have a question. I recall from last time we did this, when you send out paper copies, there's a magic number of pages before you get to the next most expensive postal limit.
I did speak with a consultant about this as well today, and he thought he didn't want us to go over 6 pages of questions because he thought you lost people right away.
Sure.
But he thought if we added a map, that it wouldn't be another question or more things to read. So he was okay with that, and he said he would work with us to see how we could best do that.
Okay. That'd be my concern, because all of a sudden you add a page and all of a sudden it costs 3 times as much for the postage and your budget gets shot. Okay, as long as we're tracking that. Alderman Strelchek.
I personally would like to know a little bit more about apartments, and when Mayor Worth was on council, we switched from multifamily apartments to, more and smaller clustered group apartments, and I
In town center.
in town center in specific.
Yeah.
I thought it expanded beyond that too, if I remember correctly. I thought that was just more broad and overarching. I didn't think it was just limited to town center.
I thought it was within town center, but Kim and Jack might. Yeah.
Other community
Town center zoning, yeah.
other communities are building bigger complexes, and with those bigger apartment complexes are coming some amenities that go with it. Not that I'm looking to do that. I just would like to understand the pulse of the community as it would relate to maybe an 8-family apartment complex, or apartment complexes that would be 50 to whatever, just a larger complex, and what that would mean. Just, it's a question that'll come up, and I think we'll appreciate the data point in years future, at least seeing it once, whether it's on this one or some future one.
Do you think that we should add a separate question inside there for that then, pertaining to, something, an opinion to, do you think that the city of Mequon has, enough apartment buildings? Do you think that we should increase apartment buildings? Do you think that it should be concentrated more on like residential? I mean, do you think that would be more of a general question to put inside of this one specifically down over here? Just pertains to the industrial area down over there, so.
Yeah, I think that would just be a good general question, but I would have sizes and amount of units in an apartment complex, and I would look to, under 100 units or under, 50 units or whatever, partner with our development team and or Alderman Parrish, with his commercial experience and, commercial buildings, just to really kind of understand where that building trend is at, just from a benchmark. Is it 50 units? Is it on average 100 units per building? And then just ask that simple question. Apartment.
We can also kind of extrapolate some of that information even out of this part down over here where they're talking about the industrial area and switching back over to the residential, because if we get a clear and positive, very opposed for apartments, you can pretty much put that would be kind of straight across the city in areas, except for ones that were designated beforehand for like town center and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which really doesn't have any room to do anymore there, but.
My pulse on the community in general is just, and I want to ratify the thought with the survey, is we're getting a lot of pushback on apartments and larger complexes until we made that change in town center to show that we preferred the smaller size as a community, and we preferred it in town center. And I want to ratify that opinion with a survey as either being correct or incorrect. So I was just kind of looking for a neutral question on what that meant.
Well, I think that specific policy, as Kim and Jack clarified, that was in regard to town center zoning. I know where you're going with this. I kind of see it as a problematic question to formulate in the 2 weeks between now and when this needs to get done.
And if it doesn't get done, it's
Yeah.
we're late to the game what they ask. It just I would have just asked for a line item apartments of such and such a buildings per unit and apartments of, you know, another quantitative number of the committees, the public welfare committees choosing, you know, a larger something, 50 per unit. And then you'd kind of have your answer just in and of that self. You know, they either want a smaller cluster or they want a bigger one. They hate them all. They like some, but they don't like the other. At least it'll give a pulse on where the community is.
Alderman Parrish, I think, had something to add.
Yeah, we had a bunch of these types of questions at the committee level where ultimately it's such a complex and nuanced subject that to try to explain where we're coming from and what we're trying to achieve would be almost impossible. I think we're kind of, with that question, if you put a general question like that, I think we're punting not only our policy making, but our case-by-case decision making. Because if you recall in the last survey, we did have a similar question, and the result of it was that pretty much everyone, or a significant amount of people were in favor of apartments when it wasn't in their district, as I recall. So everyone on the west side of town was like, yeah, you can go do as many apartments as you want on the east side of town. So I think it's a very broad-based question, and I get what we're getting at. A lot of we hear it from our residents, too many apartments, I know, but if you have a survey question, I mean, it kind of shuts down every development that's proposed, I think this would be a really hard question to have in the survey, and I don't know how we would rewrite it. So unless other council members can think of a way to handle this, or if you want it in there, I think we need to trust the planning commission and the council to, you know, with these apartment projects. I don't know that it can go in a survey.
I mean, we can take a look at it on the 20th and see what we can do for that. Maybe something that's, you know, clarity on that, but I don't like the mayor said, I don't know if we can get that all together in that short period of time to get it over to that.
Maybe you can get a simplified version, but yeah, to slice it so thin that would require a lot of staff
If it
analysis.
doesn't work, I can respect that. It just was an ask, you know.
Yeah, I think they'll kick it around and see if they can squeeze it in a general enough method that it doesn't make it too hard to do. Alderwoman Tlaco.
Just a quick thing. For number 7, like you have the residential development, you have the little cluster of like what it means, and then you have the questions and then the maps below. Is there a reason why the maps didn't go under like the little thing about it and then question 7 below?
It had to do with space, because originally the maps were separate from each other, but we needed to put them together. So we tried to put them adjoining to the questions that were being asked.
Okay. I was a little confused even looking at these maps myself. It took me a while to kind of understand them, and it just might be a little bit better if you can put them above question 7. Might
If
help
we have
people
a whole
little.
separate page for maps, maybe it'll be easier.
And also we can't split up like those charts. They can't be split onto 2 pages either. So we were trying to do the best we could with the spacing.
Yeah, we
had.
can't split the charts up, otherwise the machines they won't pull the answers out of them correctly.
The AI-assisted bot that tabulates things will get confused if a chart goes over a page
Or a
cut,
page
yeah.
break, yeah.
Or maybe it was super clear, like map A, and big bold letters, use map A for this, map B for that. It's on a separate sheet, and it can be a little bigger. I think it'll be a little more straightforward. It's just, I agree. I even had to look at it a couple times, so don't feel bad. It's a map of a pretty big area squeezed into a corner of a page, and then there's 2 of them side by side. And
Yep, we can take a crack at that.
yeah. Any other questions on 7? Got a little bit of a comment for question 8. I think the part that's missing in 8 is why we're considering it in the first place. And it really is just, we need something to happen on the revenue side, and industrial is a great way to do it because it doesn't cost us a lot on the expenditure side, but you get all that tax base. Now, I don't know how you want to formulate that question, but just a little more context. Otherwise, I'm anticipating you'll see a lot of people, I'll just leave it the way it is. There's no, why would you want to change it? That's the part that's missing. And there's a slippery slope of making that way too convoluted of a question. But, Administrator Jones.
So to your point, there's an interesting page within our annual financial report, otherwise known as our audit, which provides some level of data relative to our tax base. Maybe we can just pull the most recent figures from our 2023 audit and describe in very rough terms, you know, the composition of Mequon's tax base, residential versus commercial versus industrial, and use that as a preface to providing the additional context that you're
Single-family
referencing.
homeowners pay 85-ish% of all the bills around here, but if you had a healthier industrial base, there'd be more of them offloading the single-family homeowners on a levy basis.
So that's just one thought.
Yeah. Some way to say that in a couple of sentences or with some context.
5 words or less.
Got it.
Yeah. It's hard to say that concisely.
Okay, well, that brings us to section 4, the parks and open space. So if anyone has any feedback regarding that section?
Unless there's any questions on question 9. I don't see any. Okay. On to section 4. Alderman Strelchuk, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, just with the pool, we've got a wading pool and then we've got a splash pad. Just so the committee knows, the trend in pool building is to do a zero depth entry with a water feature on that zero depth entry, and as you get deeper, it just becomes a swimming area. So those are typically combined. I don't know that you're going to get much data points from that, but other than that, the only other thing I had a question on was like hot tub during the day. In the summer, if we go to a year-round something, hot tub maybe would be better, but I don't know that we're gonna. I see that as being a pretty hefty ongoing expense, just in general, but it's a data point for sure.
Yeah, some of those items only make sense if you have other portions of them, like if it was indoor, maybe you have a hot tub, but if it's outdoor in the summer, maybe you don't. But I don't know if there's any harm in capturing the data, but we'll have to figure out what we are going to do with it.
So I would do wading pool slash zero depth entry or something, or zero entry would be the only change that I would make. Unless you as a committee were asking if we wanted a separate wading pool just for people wading.
Does anyone from the committee have that answer?
Well, we talked about a little bit about some of these items, like the indoor one too. I mean, is there going to be an indoor pool? Does that mean indoor pool? Do you keep that on there, or is it because I don't think we're going to be doing an indoor pool? We talked a little bit about the hot tub, so you know we could. I mean, I don't know. We don't have to put those in. We could put some other language like you just suggested. If people would, you think they'd understand that?
If you, just because you had a lot of interest in one doesn't mean you have to pick it either. Yeah. Alderwoman Talaco.
I kind of looked at this question as wasted space, because I think maybe a better question would be, what are you willing to have an increase in your tax base for, as far as a pool or something more? I look at this, I'm like, I like that, then from that, pick 1, 2, and 3, but most of these are like standard features nowadays that you're going to get with a new pool in order to draw people and to create revenue, and it's going to come down to what the space can hold. So while some of this might sound great, it just might not fit in the space. So pretty much the pool is going to get what our residents are willing to afford and what the space can hold.
We debated even having the question. Quite honestly, I still debate it in my head as well. I think there's also the question of, will there be overlap with the civic campus study that's happening right now? I think they might be looking at the same stuff. And also, your comment isn't necessarily true about, are they willing to pay more in taxes? Because, as you know, the city's been great with its fiscal stewardship and the debt levels have been going down. And I think staff showed us there was a path to do this without taxes going up. And I think that's the messaging we need to somehow convey. Because, yeah, if they see this and they think we're considering whirlpools and wading pools and this and that. That's, I don't know. So I guess,
Well, we don't have cost estimates for any of it either.
Yeah.
So to even,
and I saw staff nodding that it is in the civic campus study, so I do worry about the duplicity in surveying here. We have two different surveys asking this question now.
maybe the important question to ask is, does this survey get the answers that consultant needs in the time frame they need them? And maybe the answer is, on this item, maybe no. Because I think they're going to wrap up in August, September, and this is going to wrap up in August, September, and unless there's a lot of data sharing ahead of final tabulating, it's almost like counting exit polls on election day.
Yeah, it's
Who
a
do we think's
totally
gonna
separate
win? Yeah.
separate process.
Yeah, I don't see that going well. It maybe this question is just overrun by events and the schedule of the way things are playing out. It makes room for Alderman Strelchek's apartment question.
I just wanted to clarify, when I ask about the taxpayer base, it's like the sky can be the limit if our citizens want to pay for it. We can make it indoor year round. It's going to come at a cost. We can do it fiscally responsible, and they're going to get X, Y, Z amenities because that's all we can afford while keeping the tax base low and being appropriate. Or if they want to pay a lot, hey, all right, then let's do this route, you know? So I think maybe a financial question for the pool might be a little bit more on park than what features you want.
If the committee agrees, we can pen to paper and take that to the 20th.
Yeah, maybe try to capture that. If it gets too difficult, we could always omit the question. So I think we don't have cost estimates for anything. We can't necessarily predict how much of an impact. The impact might be zero, but it might not be much. Yeah, I don't know.
When our department heads went through the survey, that was a question that they thought could be omitted. But the committees thought that this survey is going to all residents, and the civic campus plan is not necessarily going to all residents. And so that's why the committee decided to keep it.
Well, they'll take a crack at it later this month, and if it survives, it survives. If it doesn't, because of that, some of the questions and concerns, that's a decision the committee can make.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we
See
did
the chair
do
nodding his head yes. So
one of the things we did do is under question 10, and it said from a list of items in question, list 2 or 3. We're going to put some clarity inside there and how they need to indicate that, putting the option number in there for it. Otherwise, you'd probably get half the people writing it in instead of putting the number inside there. Then we won't get any data back from that at all if that happens.
any other comments on this or any item below it on the page?
Okay, well, I think that might wrap this up if no one else had any comments. We thank you for all your comments, and we will take it to our meeting on the 20th.
Everyone good? Any parting comments or questions?
I would say too that Alderman Gephardt submitted his things in writing. If other people have some things after they look at the survey and want to submit it to us in writing, or we can look at it at the get together and we look at it.
And your meeting is on the 20th? Okay. So a few days in advance of that, so staff has time to compile them and get them into the packet. Okay. Alderman Strelchek.
Just comment, really great work to the committee on this. I mean,
These are always tough.
you're going to get complaints from the community. Oh, you didn't ask the question right. And it's just one of those deals where you're trying to ask an unbiased question. You're not trying to lead. You're trying to, just get the most amount of information that you can for your decision making. And I think the committee did just an outstanding job on this. So thanks again, and your patience even with the questions tonight after you put in all the hard work is greatly appreciated.
All right, any final words?
If you guys have any feedback, if you can get to us by Friday, end of day, then we can probably include it in the packet. If it comes after, that's fine. We can always just pass it out at the Public Welfare Committee meeting.
Okay. Perfect. Everyone's got their marching orders. Before we ask for a motion to adjourn, just quickly go over the Committee of the Whole planning calendar. Our preview of coming attractions next month. We're talking about Lake Michigan Bluff text amendments. Finally, right? We're calling Alderman Box Bluff. Pun intended. Does anyone else have any ideas for future Committee of the Whole meetings? Alderman Strelchak.
Yeah, I got a call from a concerned resident last night. They may come speak at the 5 minutes where you can speak on a non-agenda item. They had a break-in at their house over the weekend, and their neighbor had a break-in the week prior, and they would have liked to have known that there were break-ins in the neighborhood. So I'd like, as a committee of the whole, just to kind of review, or even at public safety at some point, just the police communication plan and how we're keeping our residents informed, and what's reasonable to request of them as they're involved in an investigation. So just kind of some discussion on that, just to see if we can't move that needle forward a little bit and provide a little more information as our residents are concerned about break-ins of this type.
Anyone else?
Would you like to bring that to the Public Safety Committee first next month, or is that a Committee of the Whole thing?
Yeah, yes, sir. If that individual comes forward to speak, you'll hear a little bit more background as to, kind of their objections. They were really great as far as communication over the phone and articulated it really well. I can provide a summary for that and just kind of highlight what we're looking for in that space.
Anyone else? Ideas? Oh, Administrator Jones.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one preliminary word of caution relative to the Committee of the Whole planning calendar. After next month's election and after next month's 2 meetings in this room, which will be the August 8th Common Council meeting, as well as the April 8th Common Council meeting and April 15th organizational meeting, this room is going to be shut down for construction. We are waiting until the April 1st election and the 2 meetings in April, and then this room will be unavailable for use, likely between mid-April and the end of September. So staff is currently in the process of identifying alternative locations where we can hold monthly Common Council meetings, Planning Commission meetings, and monthly municipal court hearings. We are looking at a number of different options, and we'll have more information in the coming weeks. But it may impact our ability from a space constraint standpoint relative to the Committee of the Whole calendar. So there may be some massaging that goes on after next month's Committee of the Whole meeting. Just want to throw that out there. We'll do our best to stay on schedule, but we're going to be on the road at some point here in the very near future. Thank you.
Yeah, we're evicting
Administrator,
ourselves.
Administrator, I might check with the Legion Post to see if they've got they got a pretty
Oh, that's a good idea. yeah.
sizable area there for stuff.
Perfect. I like that. We can pay the bartender to be ready for afterwards, though. All right. With that, there are no other items for the planning calendar. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we're adjourned.